Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Joe Patrick on Football. My name is Joe Patrick. I'm the Falcons insider for 92.9 The Game. I've been covering the team in that capacity since 2022. And if you've been following the show, we've now been doing this since, late summer. And it is almost here. The week one of the NFL season is almost here for the Falcons. It's only, 5 days away. We're recording this on a Tuesday. Obviously, the Falcons play Sunday at home at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. We're only actually 2 days away from the start of the NFL season, which starts on Thursday, which is exciting in and of itself. But I know all you guys are waiting for the Falcons to finally get kicked off with an exciting season ahead. Michael Penix, an exciting, explosive, hopefully, offense, young, talented offense. We've been talking all about them this offseason, and we'll talk a little bit more about them today. Do want to just talk about, we did get, the opening of college football season, and this is, Joe Patrick on football, not necessarily just the Falcons or the NFL, so we can spread our wings a little bit here. Did kind of want to share one reaction I had to the opening weekend of college football, which is, and a little bit of I'm kind of checking myself here and reassessing my prior notions of preseason, because it's something I've been talking about if you've listened to 99 The Game on the radio, or I'm sure I've mentioned it on this podcast about how I'm getting a little annoyed with preseason football in general in the NFL, just the way that teams treat it, or maybe it's just, because of the way the Falcons in particular treat it with, no starters or no real important players playing in these games. I shouldn't say important players, but, veteran players, especially on offense, because you don't have the starting quarterback is not going to play under Raheem Morris, essentially, and neither is the starting offensive line. Those two things basically go together. But that's what is very frustrating, because it has, aside from that, it has most of the trappings of what is normally a regular NFL game that gets you excited to watch. You got the pregame, you got the uniforms, you got the big stadium that you're playing in, all that stuff. And it just feels like a huge letdown to then see a product on the field that is obviously not the standard of what is an NFL quality game. And the coordinators, the way the game is called, all that, I don't need to explain it to anybody. And then week one of college football happens this weekend. And what you see with teams that don't have preseason is a lot of sloppy football, a lot of, defensive football. The offenses especially are just not really clicking at this point in time, whether it was that LSU Clemson game, whether it was the Ohio State Texas game, which I got to say, I'm an Ohio State fan. I kind of called how that game was going to go down. I thought it was going to be a bit of a slog, in particular because you had two new quarterbacks being broken in by both teams who hadn't started before. On offense, on Ohio State side, you had a new offensive and defensive coordinator, but especially on offense, it's just harder to get things clicking, or a new offensive play caller, I should say. So, it just made me kind of reassess whether, preseason in college would help some of these teams and make sense. Not that I think that's going to happen, of course, but does make me wonder about how the Falcons are going to fare, having not put their own offense through the rigors of a preseason game. It's not even that it's rigorous, obviously, but it's just, being operationally sound when you get out there. Of course, they're professionals. There's more they expect of themselves. There's more that can be expected of them. They have continuity that some of these college teams don't have, that have so much of this turnover. And, maybe now that I'm just thinking about it off the top of my head, now there is more turnover in college ranks with regards to the transfer portal and everything. Wonder if that negatively affects these teams as they start the season with, I imagine that these teams tend to have more new pieces than they may have had a decade ago when they were just kind of rolling in from one class to another. So some interesting stuff, but it was certainly, to see the pageantry back, the football on TV, of course, it's incredible. Makes me excited for this season for the Falcons and across the NFL. And we'll get into, it's going to be a little bit of a shorter show today. We'll have more coming later this week. I'll be up there at the training facility Wednesday and Thursday, and we'll be talking about what the players are saying, what the coaches are saying after those days, leading into, what should be an exciting weekend. But yesterday we got news from the Falcons of who are the team captains for the year. And if you follow this team at all, it probably is not surprising to you who was picked, but we'll go through the names. On the defensive side of the football, there were two captains named, Jesse Bates and Caden Ellis. Again, unsurprising there. They are definitely the team leaders on that side of the ball, maybe for different reasons. Caden Ellis is a little bit more vocal, and Jesse Bates a little bit more on the leading by example type. But I think that Jesse is more of a a natural mentor off the field, especially for some of these guys, like in the classroom I'm talking about, in the film room, that kind of thing, especially for a young secondary group with a rookie starting safety right next to him, with a rookie starting at nickel. Will be important for Jesse Bates to be that communicative leader. Again, obviously on the field, you need to be communicating, but in the classroom as well, and just kind of helping these guys get prepared, helping them understand what they will be seeing when they go out there on Sundays. And Caden Ellis, if you've ever seen any of the mic'd ups or anything, I think you kind of understand who he is as a leader. Obviously very smart in his own right and communicative on the field, but definitely more of that like motivational type, outspoken, and obviously on his P's and Q's and knows his stuff defensively. So those are the defensive captains. And on offense, you had, I think the two that everybody knew was going to be, which is Jake Matthews and Chris Lindstrom along that offensive line, some of the most tenured Atlanta Falcons on the team at this point, now that Grady Jarrett has gone. I think it's important that Jake Matthews is, I think, the last remaining Falcon from the Super Bowl team from 2016, so still has those feelings, still knows what top tier football team looks like, feels like on the practice field, and can hopefully help kind of steer the team as much in that direction as possible. Chris Lindstrom, we all know who he is. He's the most professional guy you can imagine in terms of the way he goes about his business. I would say he's probably more along like the Jesse Bates. Well, I don't know, they're offensive linemen, so you're never really going to get these kind of like outspoken offensive linemen. I think it's kind of maybe a personality trait that leads them to be offensive linemen in the first place, is that they kind of don't want so much of the spotlight, don't kind of crave that kind of thing. But both of those guys are obviously super professional. And then the one that's most notable and was getting the headlines yesterday on social media and stuff is Michael Penix named a team captain. And by the way, this isn't something that the coaching staff obviously does. This is something that the coaching staff, it's a process that they lead, kind of like a democratic process, you would say, of just, coming up with the votes and then, reading those votes out and learning who the team captains are with everybody else. And so it's a team-led thing. The team selected Michael Penix to be one of the 6 captains of this football team, Bradley Pinion being the other captain on special teams, but don't need to talk so much about him. Michael Penix is an interesting one because, again, when we're talking about who are the vocal guys, who are the guys who are more leaders by example, I don't know he is definitely not one of the more vocal. He's one of the more, I guess if those were the two buckets, you would say Penix is in the lead by example type. But honestly, for me, like in what I've been able to observe from him and what I've heard his teammates say, both present and some of his past teammates in college or whatever, I've also heard some of his family members even talk about this. I think his mom talked about it in something that I saw online. But it's that he's a guy that has just always attracted people to him, and he's not the most outspoken. He's kind of, I don't know if introvert is exactly the best way to phrase it, but he is definitely more of a quiet guy. He's not seeking the spotlight. You don't see him, putting tons of stuff out on social media and kind of making things about him, but he certainly does have confidence, and he will speak on the field, whether that is evidenced by the fact that he was in the middle of a full-out fight scrum in the joint practices against the Titans, where apparently he said something in response to somebody who said something back to him. So he's certainly not afraid to voice his opinion in that way. But also, I think the better maybe evidence of it that everyone can see for themselves is on the Mic'd Up episode that the Falcons put out during this training camp. And I think that was a very good one for him to be mic'd up for, because that was during the Falcons' competitive intra-squad scrimmage that they had against each other the week before that Titans joint practice. That was when they had that game-like kind of scrimmage, and you can hear him talking. You can hear him getting guys fired up on the field, and saying, "I don't miss on game day," that kind of thing. And that's the kind of confidence that I think his teammates are attracted to. And obviously, as the quarterback, you're going to be, you are a leader regardless. Like, you're just a leader of the offense. You're a leader of the operation of how things are working. But it's very clear that when you talk to, especially the pass catchers, I'm thinking about Ray McLeod, Drake London, like, they have so much confidence in him, and not just in his arm talent, but in who he is as a leader. Chris Lindstrom has also talked about it when we were talking to him earlier in training camp saying that, when they saw him in the Giants game, of course, like you knew he was going to be a quarterback who had the talent, had capabilities of leading the team. But when you go into the next week on the road at night in prime time against the Commanders in a game where the Commanders had to win to clinch their playoff spot, and it was a big night for them. They had a raucous crowd there. To see him go into that game, he has some struggles early in the game, throws a pick on the opening drive, but ultimately in the 2-minute situations in both those halves is able to lead the team down the field into scoring situations, and potentially could have done that twice in the second half, leading a 2-minute drive, converting a touchdown after having been knocked back to second and 20 after a fumbled snap at the goal line to then get them into the end zone. Team gets the ball back, and he almost leads them back down for a game-winning field goal again in 30 seconds. I think that showed a lot to obviously the fan base, but the players, the guys on the field with him, that he was someone who could withstand some of these pressures that the NFL is going to present to teams. And the Falcons are going to have those situations this year where they're going to be playing a lot of primetime games. They're going to be playing in Europe. You got to adjust to all that. So those are the reasons why I think this team has a lot of confidence in Michael Penix, and one of the reasons why he was named captain. He's going to be captain of this team for a long time to come. So congratulations to him, and congratulations to congratulations to the Falcons, because it feels like that is a key step in becoming a franchise quarterback, is being able to have that on your shoulders. And it feels like Michael Penix is able to have that on his shoulders without it really feeling like a burden for him. I think back to some of these other quarterbacks, whether that I've covered with the Falcons, which is not many, but Marcus Mariota and Desmond Ridder, for example, are like two that people had questions about whether they were capable of being the team starting quarterback. And it felt like they were kind of acting out the right things to say, like it was some script. But I feel like you could that weight of carrying that burden affected, I think, both of those players during their seasons as quarterbacks. So I think the Falcons are in good stead with Michael Penix, as we've been talking about. I think he's got pretty much everything, and maybe it's not all up to snuff at this point in his career. He's only made 3 starts, of course, but I think he has all like the building blocks and the ingredients that you need to be a really high-level quarterback in the NFL. So we'll see if that comes to fruition. I mean, I think it will come to fruition. I think the question is, how quickly is he able to put all of it together, and put it together with Zac Robinson, by the way. Zac has a huge role to play in getting the best out of these players. And he also has a huge role to play in getting the best out of this offensive line that is obviously now without one of its key players in Caleb McGarry, as we've talked about since he got injured. We've learned that he's going to be out for the season. Elijah Wilkinson is going to step up into that right tackle role, as Raheem Morris, the team's head coach, confirmed to media yesterday. They've made a trade to sign Michael Jarrell. They've made a couple more practice squad additions. They're definitely stocking up in that position to try to build some depth in the meantime and see if they can find some diamond in the rough there. But Elijah Wilkinson is going to be the guy, and I don't think that that's necessarily going to change. Even if he struggles, I think that the team is much more likely to try to schematically adapt to the struggles and try to pinpoint where the struggles are coming from and try to eradicate those, as opposed to just if Elijah Wilkinson has a rough game in week 1, just swapping him out and getting another guy in there. I think that to get back to it, Zac Robinson, it's going to be very interesting to see how he deals with this situation. It's interesting that last year he had to deal with a similar kind of situation in terms of just his hands being tied to an extent, and him only being able to call certain things out of certain formations, because you had Kirk Cousins, who was less than a year removed from a torn Achilles, and you had to get the team operating at a functional level. Week 1, that level was not functional. They were not good enough in that week 1 game. That's why they lost to the Steelers, and a key loss in the season, by the way. I think that gets overblown or gets overlooked a little bit. But to lose that game really kind of put the team behind the 8 ball. Of course, then you do win in week 2 against the Eagles on Monday Night Football, maybe a game you weren't expecting to necessarily win. And you can argue the team should definitely not have won that game, considering the Eagles had it in their hands and let it slip through their fingertips, quite literally, with Saquon Barkley. But I think that this will be a much more manageable task for Zac Robinson at right tackle. I think there's just it's obviously easier to deal with a weakness at right tackle than it is a weakness at quarterback. So it'll be interesting to see how exactly he deals with that, both in two aspects. One, in the run game, of course, where I think that this change and this loss of Kaleb McGary is most going to impact the team. I'm sure that he has it kind of like in his back pocket. He always knows that he could run the ball to the right side. If needed, run the ball to the right side. You're going to have some sort of positive play behind Chris Lindstrom and Kaleb McGary. With Elijah Wilkinson in his place, not so certain that that's going to be the case. Now, could it be? Of course, you have a really talented back in Bijan Robinson. You still have Chris Lindstrom on that right side, who you really trust as a run blocker, but it's not as certain maybe as it was previously to call some of those plays. And so how do you adjust for that? How does the team mix up its run game? I've always felt like they were always going to mix up their run scheme more this year versus what they did last year based off of the change at center. Ryan Neusel has a different profile than Drew Dalman does as a run blocker. And I don't think not many centers in the NFL are as capable as Dalman at getting to that second level and moving linebackers off of their landmarks where they're trying to have these run fits on this outside zone. And so I've always thought that Ryan Neusel, like his strength, his profile is just kind of power off the ball, just a good power profile basically at center. And I would think that would be conducive to some more gap scheme, man style blocking stuff. And I think that with more, if you are running in that style, you are more likely to break off those big runs because of just the physics of running the ball at a more direct angle toward the line of scrimmage and being able to bust through the lines of the defense and break through in that way, as opposed to attacking at a more horizontal angle. And you just limit the ability for yourself to really truly break out those long touchdown style runs. I think that Bijan Robinson can be capable of, and I think Bijan Robinson also can be very, very good in those situations. I find some of his most jaw-dropping moments come in those runs that, not even forget between the tackles, like between the guards, honestly. When he's able to maneuver in a phone booth like no one I've seen, only, I shouldn't say nobody I've seen, but very, very few in NFL history, I would say even, can operate like Bijan Robinson does, just in those extremely tight spaces. So I think that, it could lead actually to some improvements in the run game, but there might also be some concessions that you make in terms of like not being able to as consistently pick up yardage, especially when you feel like you need it, like the team has previously behind McGary and Lindstrom. And then in the pass protection game, does Zac Robinson rely on Charlie Warner some more to stay in and chip? The team did not like to put their tight ends out in routes in play action last year. Do they run play action? Do they feel comfortable running play action with that right and that new tackle on the blind side? I don't think it's going to be that big of an issue, to be honest, because Kaleb McGary was never a great pass blocker in general. And I'm predicting something now, and I want you guys to be conscious of this as we watch Falcons games. Elijah Wilkinson's going to make mistakes. Every offensive lineman makes mistakes. Every offensive lineman gives up sacks and pressures. And there's going to be this tendency for every time it happens to Elijah Wilkinson in particular, or Storm Norton going forward, if Storm Norton wins the job back, by the way, there's going to be this tendency to like think like, oh, well, Kaleb McGary would have had that, like if only they had their starting right tackle, they would have cleaned up that block. It's like a backup quarterback or something. When they're not in the game, you always think that they're going to be able to execute anything that they were going to be asked to do. And I think it's just going to be one of those things. It's going to be tough for these right tackles to have to deal with that kind of media scrutiny of, always having assumed that the only reason that they failed was because they were out there and it was some other player, where, I could definitely foresee situations that Elijah Wilkinson or Storm Norton would have successful pass blocks and they don't even get noticed, where McGary might have given up like a clean rush in some respects. Because I think dealing with some of those speed rushers, I'm not so sure about Wilkinson because I haven't seen him play tackle, but with Storm Norton, I think he's much better at dealing with some of those types of rushers than a player like Caleb McGarry was, or Caleb McGarry himself. So just something to keep in mind and to keep note of as we move forward. As we're talking about injuries with the team or players that could be missing, Darnell Mooney, kind of on the opposite side of this coin, back in practice. We don't know the extent to the amount he's been practicing. I do expect that we'll get an injury report at some point Wednesday during this week, where we will get not only his game prognosis as to whether he's probable, questionable, whatever, but also just like how much he's playing, how much of a participant he is in practice. Is he a full participant or limited? I think that's going to be interesting to see. I would say, though, that I am on the more optimistic side of the coin that he will be able to play and play relatively to the maximum of his capability for this week 1 game. And the main reason being, it's not that I know anything about the injury itself, other than that we know that it's an upper body injury, a shoulder injury, as opposed to anything lower body, honestly. Like, I would be more concerned if it was like a hamstring at this point. Considering he's back at practice and like participating to some extent in the practices, I feel pretty confident that he's going to be able to go out there and, run his routes like he normally would, with the speed and burst that you expect from a receiver like Darnell Mooney. And, doesn't get talked about enough, the deceleration that Darnell Mooney has. He can stop on a dime, and that's what allows him to create the separation that he does. And I think that if he's able to do that, then he's going to be a great outlet for Michael Penix. And he could even be due for quite a big game, potentially, because all teams have seen of the Falcons so far this preseason, or what they can expect of the Falcons based on the reports that have come out, is Drake London has just been this absolute target monster in training camp because you don't have that guy on the other side of the football. Now, Casey Washington, who's stepped in for Darnell Mooney, has had his fair share of downfield catches, but he just hasn't been that consistent target for Penix like London has. And so if Tampa Bay comes out and is like doing everything possible to stop Drake London, I think Darnell Mooney could have a big game, and Darnell Mooney had big games against Tampa Bay last year. So I expect him, at this point, I feel pretty good about him. And if he is back, I think that it just makes this offense, even more dynamic, because we haven't seen him. Like, we've been talking about this offense, and we being the media, the people who have been able to go out there and see. I'm sure a lot of you guys have been out there on to training camp, and you saw a dynamic offense that can create big plays, that can go a lot of different places with the football, whether that is Casey Washington or Kyle Pitts or Bijan Robinson or Drake London. When you add Darnell Mooney to that mix, he's one of the better ones of that group in terms of in the passing game, the threats in the passing game. So he's going to create a threat for himself. You also wonder how the threat of him being on the field creates more space for guys like Kyle Pitts and Bijan Robinson. So I'm excited. I'm excited to see how this offense goes. It's going to be really good. If you are going to the game, by the way, before we get out of here, I do want to just kind of promote our coverage here a little bit on 92.9 The Game. I will be out there before every home game. We'll be talking on the radio regardless, whether it's home or away. But for the home games, myself and Andy Bunker from Andy and Randy on 92.9 The Game, we'll be out there from 9 to 11 a.m. on, I forget what it is, where the bridge over Centennial Yards is where we'll be. It's that blue and green one, I think. So that's where we'll be stationed this year, giving you guys coverage. Please come by and say hi if you do. And then following us will be Mike Johnson and Grant McCauley, who's now on the coverage for the Atlanta Falcons radio network. And then, of course, Wes Durham and Dave Archer, the two legends, on the call for the game. Chris Thomas will have you for the Falcons flyover after Mike and Grant get done with the post game, taking your calls, doing all that stuff. So that's always good. But if you're going to the game, even if you're just driving down to go tailgate, just flip us on the radio. We'll be on, and definitely say hi if you get a chance to come by. We'll be on talking Falcons football, obviously, and we'll be talking Falcons football on the radio most of this week because it's very exciting stuff as we talked about today. We'll come back to you later this week with more of what's being said at the training facility, and we'll talk to you soon.